The 1970s were fun, rebellious, and totally chaotic. But some of the things people did back then, they'd get you handcuffed today. In this video, we're diving into 30 insane, unbelievable, and downright dangerous habits that were completely normal in the 70s, but would be illegal or seriously frowned upon today. From kids riding in cars with no seatbelts, to smoking on airplanes, to hitchhiking on highways. This decade, really, set rules. Never heard of her? If you grew up in the 70s, prepare to laugh, cringe, and maybe question how anyone survived. If you didn't, get ready for a wild history lesson. We break it all down in a fun, fast-paced, nostalgia-filled video that will keep you hooked from start to finish. The 1970s were a time of unparalleled freedom, a decade of bell-bottoms, disco, and a devil-may-care attitude that seems almost mythical today. But beneath the veneer of groovy vibes and liberation, there were some shocking safety blind spots. It was a period where the concept of a nanny state was laughable, and personal responsibility was king, even when common sense took a vacation. Looking back, it's a miracle so many people made it out alive. Considering the daily risks they took without a second thought, what we now see as life-threatening dangers were just part of the everyday routine back then. Things that would spark a public outcry or a police intervention were as common as a fondue pot at a dinner party. Many behaviors, from how people drove to how they raised their kids, were governed by a sense of blissful ignorance about long-term consequences. This wasn't about being intentionally reckless. It was simply a different world. One that had not yet been shaped by the decades of safety research and tragic lessons that we now take for granted. Let's start with the open road, which was more like the Wild West. Car safety laws were incredibly relaxed, leading to a host of risky habits that are unthinkable today. For instance, seatbelt laws were practically non-existent for most of the decade. It was completely normal to pile into the family station wagon with no one buckled up. The front bench seat could comfortably fit three, and if you were a kid, the most coveted spot was the way back, the rear-facing pop-up seat in a station wagon, where you could make faces at the cars behind you, completely unrestrained. Even more shocking was the common practice of letting a child ride on a parent's lap in the front seat, sometimes even helping to steer. Today, that wouldn't just get you a ticket. It would likely involve a visit from Child Protective Services. This casual approach to safety was most glaring when it came to children. Child safety regulations were either minimal or entirely absent. Car seats, as we know them today, were a novelty. The early versions were little more than flimsy plastic booster seats with a decorative steering wheel, offering zero protection in a crash. They were designed to keep a child contained, not safe. It was also common for kids to ride in the open bed of a pickup truck, bouncing along on the highway with the wind in their hair. It was seen as a fun perk of country living, not the high-speed ejection risk it truly was. This lack of oversight was a defining feature of 70s parenting. Now, let's talk about the smoke-filled haze that covered everything. Smoking was not just socially acceptable, it was practically mandatory. People smoked everywhere, without exception. On airplanes, you'd be asked smoking or non-smoking, and the sections were often separated by just a few rows, with a curtain of smoke drifting freely between them. You could light up in hospital waiting rooms, in grocery store aisles, in university lecture halls, and even in movie theaters. The ashtray was as standard in a car as the radio. The idea that secondhand smoke was dangerous was a fringe concept, and the right to smoke trumped everyone else's right to breathe clean air. Just as smoking rules were lax, so were the attitudes toward alcohol. The legal drinking age was 18 in many states, and even then, enforcement was often a joke. It wasn't uncommon for a parent to let their teenager have a beer at a family barbecue, or for a high schooler to buy a six-pack with a questionable ID. Open container laws. Many places didn't have them, so having a beer while walking down the street or enjoying a roadie on a drive was a frequent sight. The cultural link between driving and drinking was also terrifyingly strong. The phrase "one for the road" was used literally. And while drunk driving was illegal, the social stigma and legal consequences were nowhere near what they are today. Public transportation and air travel existed in a different reality, one without today's stringent security protocols. Getting on a plane was like boarding a bus. You could walk up to the gate with a non-flying friend or family member to see you off. There were no full-body scanners, no liquid restrictions, and baggage checks were cursory at best. The biggest travel concern was whether your luggage would make it, not whether a fellow passenger was a security threat. Similarly, hitchhiking was a common and often romanticized way to travel. Young people would stand by the side of the highway, thumb out, and strangers would actually stop. It was seen as an adventurous rite of passage, not the potentially deadly gamble it's recognized as today. With parents often at work or simply trusting the world to be a safer place, kids in the 70s had a level of independence that seems astounding now. They would leave the house after breakfast and not return until the streetlights came on. Their territory was the entire neighborhood, and their activities were unsupervised. They built rickety tree houses, played in active construction sites, and rode their bikes for miles without a helmet or a cell phone. This freedom fostered resilience and creativity, but it also exposed them to a host of dangers. From traffic accidents to encounters with strangers that would make any modern parent's blood run cold. The dangers weren't just outside. The home itself was a minefield of hazards, thanks to weak environmental laws. People thought nothing of pouring used motor oil down a storm drain or dumping old paint in the backyard. Burning trash in a rusty barrel was a common way to get rid of household waste, releasing toxic fumes into the air. Lead paint was still present in many homes, and kids were at risk of poisoning from chewing on windowsills or playing with peeling paint chips. The long-term environmental and health consequences of these actions were simply not on the public's radar. Beyond environmental toxins, many homes lacked the basic safety equipment we now consider essential. Smoke detectors were not standard in most houses until the very end of the decade. A kitchen fire would be announced by the smell of smoke or the sight of flames, not by a piercing alarm. Fire extinguishers were rare, and electrical systems were often outdated, with ungrounded two-prong outlets being the norm. A safety-proofed home wasn't a concept most people had ever heard of. The dangers extended to the playroom, where toys and chemicals available to children were subject to virtually no regulation. Many chemistry sets contained genuinely hazardous and flammable chemicals that allowed kids to conduct experiments that could easily start a fire or cause a minor explosion. Lawn darts, or jarts, were a popular backyard game. These were large, heavy metal spikes with plastic fins, designed to be thrown underhand at a plastic ring on the ground. Unsurprisingly, they were incredibly dangerous, leading to thousands of injuries and several tragic deaths before they were finally banned. Toys were often made with small, detachable parts that posed a serious choking hazard, a risk that wasn't widely publicized. This carefree attitude was reflected and reinforced by pop culture, which often glorified risk-taking behaviors that are now considered criminal or deeply irresponsible. In movies and on TV, car chases were thrilling spectacles where heroes drove recklessly, rarely wearing seatbelts. Characters frequently drove after having a few drinks at a bar, and it was portrayed as cool and masculine. The rebel without a cause archetype was alive and well, encouraging a generation to question authority, which sometimes included questioning basic safety rules. Underpinning all of this was a general lack of health awareness. The long-term risks of smoking, sun exposure, and poor diet were not widely understood or discussed. People would slather themselves in baby oil to get a deep tan, completely unaware of the risk of skin cancer. Processed foods laden with sugar, salt, and unpronounceable chemicals became staples of the American diet. A healthy meal might be a slice of meatloaf with a side of canned green beans and a scoop of Jell-O salad. The connection between lifestyle choices and long-term health outcomes, like heart disease and cancer, was just beginning to enter the mainstream consciousness. Today's world is fundamentally different. Our laws and social norms have been shaped by decades of scientific, technological, and medical advancements. We have data that proves seatbelts save lives, that secondhand smoke kills, and that lead paint causes brain damage. Car manufacturers are required to include airbags and crumple zones. The EPA regulates what can be poured down the drain, and the CPSC ensures that toys don't have sharp metal points or contain toxic materials. We have learned, often the hard way, from the mistakes of the past. Looking back at the 1970s isn't about judging our parents or grandparents. It's a fascinating look at a society in transition, caught between post-war tradition and the dawn of the information age. It reveals just how far we've come in our understanding of safety, health, and collective responsibility. While some may miss the unbridled freedom of the 70s, it's hard to argue against the countless lives that have been saved by the rules, regulations, and awareness we've gained since. Watch till the end. Number 28 will make your jaw drop. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more nostalgia deep dives every week.